So today I would like to chat a little bit about what is it to be oneself, as commonly understood within, I guess, ordinary life, and what is true refuge, and how can one start approaching the true refuge and differentiate between the bias of selfishness and actual practice. So there is a what is refuge? One of my teachers would say refuge can be found in Samsara. It could be found in vipassana. It could be found in nibbana. And when we talk about being myself, that's obviously the refuge found in samsara. Yeah. Let's break this down. Yeah. What does being myself imply? All the activities of the self that was acquired through the process of upbringing are taken through the filter of likable and dislikable. It is the process of incorporation and expulsion, which we have been talking about in the process of ego formation that is at stake to form preferences within a subject. Yeah. Regardless of the structure of the subject, there will be preferences, because even if the ego hasn't quite formed, such may be the case for autistic or schizophrenic subjects, there still is a plethora of preferences which that subject lives by. Yeah? There is still a cloud of experiences that a subject finds likable and agreeable and not stressful. You know? Outside this cloud of preferences, experiences that can be put on this kind of grade of mildly discomfortable, which is uncomfortable, that is acceptable to a certain extent. Then there are experiences which require patience to endure, and then there are experiences which are unacceptable whatsoever for that particular subject. And that's a cloud which forms a bias of self, really. Because everything that is outside the cloud of preferable, on the level of whatever, on the level of mind, on the level of somatosensory plethora, on the level of feelings, whatever is outside of this cloud is not acceptable. It requires endurance, it requires effort to bear, to be with, to witness, to be around, basically. If someone or something impinges upon this cloud of preferences, which constitutes the self-bias, what we have is obviously a reaction. Reaction arises, and that reaction is more often than not is that of negation. I don't want this. I can't handle this. I can't bear this. Once this reaction is there, what is at stake obviously is the ego reacting to the experience which is not circumscribed or not incorporated into the ego as self. So we are having the experiences which are ranging from mildly annoying to disturbing to utterly psychosis-inducive, if you like, or inducive of a neurotic break or a psychotic break or any kind of breakdown that subject may experience if they are exposed to those stimulus, those experiences. Yeah. That's basically the functioning of the ego in the ordinary sense, as it is not trained to endure experiences which are not liked. And within samsara, within ordinary people, that's a normal way of functioning for beings everywhere. They fashion themselves, their personalities, their characters, their environments, their apartments, their circles of friends, according to the cloud of preferable that they live by. And gradually they may increase their elasticity and start incorporating into their cloud and their personality, into their circle of friends, experiences and activities, things that previously have been perhaps not so endurable, not so likable. Thereby kind of expanding their horizon. But still, they're functioning according to the modicum of I like this, it gives me some kind of pleasure, because that's what ego is based on, the sense of wholeness, which is illusory, yet people take it for reality, and dwell in accordance with it. There is no horizon beyond this cloud of pleasurable experiences that constitute ego. Needless to say, that's what makes beings within samsara continuously a subject for various reactions, because things that are outside their preferences are continuously impinging upon them. This is inevitable. This is a fact of life, a first noble truth. There is dissatisfaction. There are things that are outside your ego that you haven't even incorporated, and you can't possibly even incorporate all the things into your ego. And these things can impinge upon you. However, what's happening usually within this dynamic of interacting with the world via the cloud of experiences that are pleasurable, that constitute one's ego, is that the subject kind of fluctuates between exposure to the things which are traumatic to them, getting a kick out of it, and returning again into the shell of their being myself sort of experiences. How it rotates. So for example, we have what basically being myself is clinging, isn't it? As a form of upadana, if we use Pali jargon. Clinging to something that we are pleased about. However, when the experience impinges and the reaction arises, what then follows is traumatic jouissance. To remind ourselves what is jouissance is the experience that is both pleasurable and dreadful, that is both stressful, disturbing, yet there is some kind of kick that people get from it, such as people want to expose themselves to dark side, to nightlife, to drugs, to horror films, to various kinds of despicable atrocities or entertainments or whatever that puts them on that edge and they feel like they're exploring something that is outside themselves, beyond themselves. This constitutes jouissance. This is something that scares people, and yet they want to explore it because they extract this particular kind of enjoyment from this experience of jouissance, which is traumatic yet both pleasurable. So whenever a subject is kicked out by experience that outside themselves, from their cloud of ego, they enter the traumatic jouissance. What they get is then experience of shock, slight shock, slight shattering experience to their being, to their horizon of possibilities, because the experience is not pleasurable. It is shocking. It kicks them out of themselves, of their habitual equanimity based on clinging, which is not true equanimity, obviously. Shock, then there follows a certain process of, as you have probably studied elsewhere, stages of shock, how one can process shock. There are whole cascades of physiological processes and reactions, neurological reactions, etc., that human beings go through once they are in shock and as they are going out of shock. Eventually, what follows is some kind of pacification. However, it is here that we are then back again, returning to clinging. Because having been exposed to shock and having been horrified by the possibility of living outside of the ego and having no alternative to tackle that experience, what beings are left to do is to actually, not even this one, good to have many colors, reinforce clinging. Having experienced this traumatic jouissance and having got a kick of it and having got some kind of enlightenment even from that, with the absence of a proper system of training that would lead them beyond the self, ordinary beings dwelling in samsara instead return back to the self and reinforce the clinging to that self, creating new various more common than not is new various rules and regulations for themselves to delimit basically this experience of traumatic jouissance, to kind of ward off the world that impinges those experiences on them even more. So we have this kind of vicious cycle: clinging, traumatic jouissance, reinforcement of clinging, whilst they're going through shocks in between. And that's all of that, that's kind of, it's entertaining to a certain extent. People do not admit it more often not, but they like it because it is stimulating. Yeah. And if you remember how acquired mind functions, whatever experiences it finds stimulating, it clings to them and it wants more of them. Yeah. Even though fundamentally it actually produces nothing in terms of cultivation, in terms of true transformation. It's just a kick that they get through exposure to that which they initially negate. Yeah. Self-reinforcement usually is done via reinforcing of selfishness, self-cherishing, and what else? And via grief and fear of self-loss. Grief and fear of self-loss. Obviously, traumatic jouissance kicks them out of the self temporarily, which produces shock. Then, during the pacification of shock, we enter the process of grief, of something has been lost, as if, and fear of losing it entirely. Hence, then follows selfishness and self-cherishing even more. And hence the ego and the character and the habits and the preferences and the basically neurosis, if one is neurotic, or psychotic delusion, or whatever else, perverted law, are reinforced, are made more resistant, more reactive to the experiences. So that then when experiences enter again, there are all sorts of various devices in place to process those experiences for subjects. And on the level of samsara, that's not necessarily bad, because people need some kind of coping mechanisms to deal with the stress of life. Needless to say that this kind of refuge is not secure, because it's repetitive, because it binds a subject more through the shackles of self-cherishing and grief and fear, and actually doesn't lead to liberation. It creates and leads to creating more of the boundaries around oneself. So instead of free, one becomes bind more and more and more. And that's kind of the process of distortion, isn't it? I have only one color which I haven't used. All of this is called distortion. If we use Taoist methodology, that's the process of distortion. From being at the level of congenital functioning, where the essence is kind of distorted but more or less pure, through this process of ego formation, reactions, response, new reaction, reinforcement, self-cherishing, etc. The initial pure mind becomes distorted. And that leads to formation of layers, personality, and creates the karma, which leads to further rebirth in one of the 6 realms of samsara. That is given that the subject does not cultivate. Yeah? That they're kind of following along, trotting along the path that is given to them through their culture, their upbringing, their education, getting by basically, and finding the way to live, to survive, to sustain themselves, to enter into relationships, to lose those relationships, etc. For majority of people, this is good enough. That's where people are happy to live, and they actually find themselves successful, more or less, in this process of maintaining this neurotic equilibrium, this process of self-reinforcement. Yeah. However, for those who want to go beyond, or those who witness actual daunting quality of this process, who's seen it for a risk, how much suffering there is actually without having been blinded by the fake pleasure of self-cherishing, they would obviously will be looking for a different refuge, yeah, and that's the refuge in vipassana. So let's look at that next. So, refuge in vipassana. Before talking classically about what vipassana is, in terms of the process of witnessing with clear sight the body, the feelings, the formations and the dhammas, let us look at the prerequisite processes that are required to even being able to witnessing with clear sight. Yeah? And that's usually not discussed within Buddhist theory. It is more discussed along the lines of Taoist models. So let's look at this. What's the first step at this process? Body. We need to develop body. And that's still kind of on the level of ordinary, on the level of samsara, because things like mobility, strength, flexibility, endurance, skillfulness, capacity to move the body, to exert strength, to exert propulsion, whatever, basic skills of locomotion and advanced skills of locomotion, skills of fighting, swimming, dancing, interacting with others on the level of physicality, so that one is not burdened and bound by the lack of physical capacity is needed. And even strong, able, capable body is needed to then produce chi. We need to develop chi on the basis of the body, on the basis of health of the body first, the basis of capability of the body first. So the chi, via then consolidation, mobilization, can produce clearly the substances of yin and yang chi that then will further organize and animate this vehicle of divinity, which is the body, from the inside. And that's kind of we start to already border towards refuge beyond samsara if we are able to access the chi. Yeah. kind of separate this, because here beyond this line, we already start to border upon touch upon the refuge proper, according to cultivation. Nothing wrong with the refuge as per samsara. Majority of people, like I said, are happy and enduring with that refuge. However, for those who found it insufficient, which it is, this is what follows. Chi must be developed and organize and consolidate and animate the body from the inside, making it reliable to develop the mind. Here, we of course have various aspects of developing the mind. Yeah. Virtue. Merit. Focus. So virtue, parami. 10 parami, which are, I always forget the order, but wholesome qualities of one's character, which one can access via transforming emotions. We have talks about transforming emotions elsewhere. But such parami as generosity, simplicity, renunciation, equanimity, loving kindness, sympathetic joy, resolution, wisdom, etc., are developed here through this transformation of emotions, through the practice of wholesome conduct, really. Yeah. Then this will start generating merit, and that's karma. No. Karma. One's very interaction with the world, from the store of merit that once had developed, starts to generate karma that is beneficent, benevolent, not dangerous. Such paramis as wisdom, for example, allow one to develop clarity in regards to one's conduct, and one stops running in circles as per samsaric pattern of clinging, discerns, reinforcement of clinging, so that one's worldly karma gradually starts to get exhausted through this kind of merit. Then we have focus, samadhi. Samadhi gradually teaches one to concentrate the mind, make it one point, and absorb it onto the object, yeah? Such that it has capacity to ignore the usual mental chatter of the monkey mind, of the acquired mind, that runs the circles of, okay, here I'm going to reinforce my ego, okay, I'm going here to put barriers to others enduring or intruding upon my ego, and etc. That chatter is gradually ignored, basically, through the practice of samadhi, until one starts entering the states of stillness, states of light, states of calm, and proceeding from there, states of bliss, which bring one to the contact with the soul, pure energy. Pure energy that emanates from the contact with the soul. And this is already more of a refuge at this level. Yeah. This is not yet vipassana, actually. This is just prerequisites developing refuge. Now, wisdom. Wisdom proper. Capacity to see for what it is, the characteristics of existence, unsatisfactoriness, lack, impermanence and selflessness of all phenomena. What we have here mostly is dependent arising, three characteristics. Having developed wisdom, or in the process of developing wisdom, one learns to see into the conditioning process that is happening in the mind, the process by which one creates the self that is false refuge within samsara. One cannot possibly even see it if one hasn't touched upon these, hasn't touched upon the stillness and pure energy that emanate from the core of one's being that is outside mind, that really envelops the mind. Having access to that pure energy via samadhi, one then has one's mind strengthened to be able to endure the process of seeing into dependent co-arising. How does one actually create the self? So where from the seed of thought, which is born via reaction to that which is impinging upon one's cloud of pleasurable, that is ego, one can then start building emotive reactions, then trains of thought which reinforce those emotive reactions to justify them as something that one needs, and builds the self out of it. I am someone who cannot stand this. I am someone who likes this. I reacted to this because of this and that. Just seeing this process on a continuous basis, how out of the contact arises feeling, how out of the feeling arises clinging, and that's particularly clinging to the feeling, which can either be pleasurable, painful, or neutral, with aversion, attraction, or ignorance. Then, on the basis of clinging, arises craving for more pleasurable, for less painful, and ignoring in regards to neutral, which is neither stimulating nor revolting. On the basis of that, then craving arises becoming. One wants to be more of the pleasurable and reinforce it, and that's exactly touching upon the process of self-reinforcement that we touched upon previously, and ward off that which is not pleasurable and that which is challenging, that which is painful. Having become somebody, one inevitably disintegrates and dies. That's the inevitable link of dependent co-arising. Becoming leads to birth of someone, birth leads to death of someone. All things that are compounded disintegrate. This is the basis of Buddhist teaching. Having seen this continuously within oneself, how self is triggered into creation, then defends itself, then demands for its recognition, that blames other for lack of that recognition. Having seen this process and how it leads to creation of someone, and how that someone doesn't actually last, it actually disintegrates, and one then goes through the process again and again and again, one starts to see that these conditioning links of becoming are dissatisfactory, they are dukkha, they are not constant, they don't provide one with refuge. So, seeing this on the continuous basis, one actually enters in true refuge. Now this is vipassana. Clear seeing of the conditioning process that comprises one's self. Yeah. That's the refuge here. I don't think there is much use of touching upon the refuge here, because the refuge here starts when one has this knowing stabilized and happening 24/7 until one's mind has fused with the Dhamma, until one sees all phenomena as Dhamma. Yeah. Because only then one can start touching upon the deathless, the cessation, the Nibbana, which is nothing else really there to touch upon apart from that, because everything else is seen through three characteristics, and the modicum of clinging, that greed for becoming, is gradually worn out. It's gradually abandoned more and more and more. On the basis of this knowing, one then starts establishing the refuge here in Nibbana, in the deathless, called deathless because it is not formed, it has not been compounded via the activity of the dependent arising and the aggregates. It is precisely because one sees dependent arising that the process of compounding within one's being, the process of creating myself, gradually stops. Yeah. Because the process of creation stops, there is nothing to die. Yeah. Hence the abiding of this being is then amounts to deathless. That is not the end in itself, because even here one may develop a modicum of clinging to that state of the deathlessness. And once again, relying on vipassana, on wisdom, and on samadhi, on clarity and stillness, and the abundance of pure energy emanating from the soul, one can abandon that modicum of clinging, that very slight problem that arises on that very high level, so that one does not return anymore to samsara. Yeah. So in a nutshell, this is the process of developing true refuge. Yeah. And how different it is from a conventional process of being myself, reinforcing myself, and looking for true self, or whatever people do. Anyhow, thank you.